Hello, 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 everyone. Thank you all for joining. I welcome Angela, Bean, Clint, Sin, L, HLD, Lindsay, Merrick, Paula, Penelope, Ruchi, Theo, Cassandra, Kimberly, Mika into the space. And Clint as well. Welcome, welcome. And to those who will be joining us on replay later, we say welcome to you as well. So as we begin to move into our shared time together today, we have 90 minutes together. I invite you to take a moment to just ensure that you have any materials that you might want or need as we move through this workshop. I always recommend having a journal or some pieces of paper if you like to take notes or doodle or process. But you will also need it for some of the journaling and reflection exercises we'll do later. And I also encourage snacks, water, a hot beverage that you really love, taking care of our bodies. We will be exploring some topics that may bring up some emotions. And so taking care and nourishing yourself in any way that would be supportive. Let's see. That covers materials. In terms of using this space, we're on Zoom, and I encourage us to make use of the chat box to share any takeaways, insights, and of course, any questions that might come up. You're also welcome to use emojis, the raise hand function, in order to chime in. I really want this to feel like we're in conversation. I certainly don't want to be talking and presenting on my own. So just know I really welcome that interplay, that dialogue here. And last but not least, I will be sending out a post-session resources email. It will include some guidance for the activities we'll do today, some follow-up resources, and links to some additional stuff you can read if this is interesting to you. So know that that's coming. And if you enjoy your experience today, and if you have the means, all of the free community care events that I'm hosting this month, I am also running or I guess I'm asking for donations if you want to express gratitude if you have means. That will go towards the financial aid fund for Rewriting Our Rest Stories, which is my group program for Asian and Pacific Islander women and femmes to liberate themselves and their lineages through rest. And if you make a donation, you'll be entered to win one of 3 one-on-one private rest mentorship sessions with me. So it's a win-win for everyone, raising money for a really good cause to go to supporting community members in need, while also getting a chance to win a rest mentorship call and just overall exchanging energy and supporting this shared space of co-learning. All right. So I'll give a little bit of an introduction to myself. I imagine there's some maybe new faces here as well as some returning faces. My name is Cassandra Lam. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently calling today from the unceded lands of the Cherokee, which is also colonially known as Asheville, North Carolina. I am a neurodivergent, autistic, Vietnamese-Chinese-American somatic healing facilitator, grief tender, and community caregiver, which essentially means I really love to create experiences and anything that supports collective liberation and the community care we're going to need to support the collective liberation. Let's see. Any other identities I want to share? I think that's all for now, but I think one thing that's relevant to the session we're going to be diving into today, a little known fact about me. In undergrad, I studied political science with a concentration in political theory, which is a way of saying I basically studied old dead white European colonizers and their philosophies and ideologies. And basically ever since graduation, it's been at first slow and then eventually snowballed into a rapid need to decolonize myself inside out. And so this workshop was really fun to put together because I got to pull in some of the things that I remember studying in undergrad that didn't quite hit as violent back then because of my consciousness where it was like back in college, which is over a decade ago. But I am excited to be able to show up, utilize some of that background, and help us all hopefully walk out of this session with an embodied as well as intellectual understanding of the linkage between personal unrest and political unrest. And so to that end, I would love for us to take a moment to really open up this space in a sacred way. And so I'm going to be offering a reading of a piece of poetry from Yrsa Daley Ward, who is a Black British poet and writer. And for this invocation, this reading, I invite you to take a moment if you can. I recognize some folks might be in the car or on the go. I invite you to take a moment and come to a seat or a relative posture of stillness. And if it's safe to do so, I'll invite you to close the eyes. And it's just that when we close the eyes, essentially we have 80% of our sensory input from the outside world coming through the eyes. So when we close the eyes, it allows the other senses to be enhanced, including our capacity to listen. And listening with the intention of letting these words land and just noticing the ripples that they make across your body and your being. And so if you haven't already, taking this next moment to come into a comfortable posture and beginning to close the eyes. And I invite you to take over the next 30 seconds to do any gentle movements that would allow you to just settle a little more in your body. So maybe you're rolling the shoulders forward and back. Maybe you're taking a moment to roll the neck out, or maybe gently massaging the jaw and the temples. This could also look like shaking out the arms, the body, horse slips, exaggerated sigh. Just taking about the next 10 seconds to get some of the jiggles out so that we can be a little bit more present here. And then I'll invite us to begin to tune into the breath. And so as you inhale, see if you can start to lengthen the breath, inviting the torso to expand 360 degrees as your lungs fill up with fresh oxygen. And then open mouth, let out a sigh. And feel your shoulders descend down your back, the body soften. And twice more, 2 more cleansing breaths. Slow, full inhale, really inviting the belly to expand, feeling the chest expand, ribs expand. Open mouth, exhale, HA. Really squeeze the navel to spine. See if you can get that stagnant air out of the bottom of the lungs. So that as you inhale one more time, there's a little more room for newness, for something fresh to enter your system. Gentle exhale. And at the bottom of that exhale, I invite you to take a moment to think about who, what, or where helps you feel safe and protected. We're just taking a moment to call on our resources, the relationships that nourish us and feed us and help us feel strong. So who, what, or where helps you feel safe and protected? Maybe you're thinking of the land or your favorite place in nature. Maybe you're thinking about a loved one, an ancestor, or a friend giving you a hug. Or maybe you're thinking about and tuning into the heart, the steady beat in your chest, this heart that can break open and love harder, this heartbeat that reminds us we're alive. Whatever it is, just taking the next 3 rounds of breath to really connect with that and inviting in any allies, beings, spirits, ancestors, deities that you're working with, inviting them into the space to help us hold the bigness of the moment and of the transformations we are collectively going through. May they support us in being open and heart-centered and stay in curiosity and compassion as we begin to move through this session and as we move through the days, weeks, and months to come. And I'll invite you to remain in this soft, grounded state as I begin to share with you the words from a piece called Body as the Very Present by Yrsa Daley Ward. Did you know that you can study the body by taking the time, by taking notes? Do you know that you can begin to regulate? Do you know that no one knows your body more? So with all this in mind, imagine you paid attention. This is a lifetime of learning. Imagine you knew how best to nourish your mind, the place where your future is made. Imagine you gave your body more of the things that it needs to flourish. Imagine you knew more about what to keep and what to let go of. This is a lifetime of learning. Imagine you started to notice and really learn your body, the way that we learn the things that we love. What if you changed some of your questioning? Not what do I think about this, but what do I feel? Not what must I do about this, but where might I begin to find myself? What are the sensations happening in your body? In what situations do they come about? Where is the truth showing up over and over and over again? When do you recede and where do you contract? When do you expand and make the most of yourself? Not why, but where does it hurt? Furthermore, what do you continue to put in your body that continues to harm your body? How much can a body take? How are you masking the truth of your body over and over and over again? How are you blocking your messages? Could you be more of a friend to yourself? When the feeling comes, when the discomfort is there, how does it feel to sit inside it? Where is the thing that hurts? Before we know why, we have to locate it. Before we begin to look for the solution, fix, or release, we have to locate it. Where was the pattern formed? Where does the pattern begin? What are you repeating over and over and over again? Where is the disconnect? What is this tightening, this stitch, this ache, this will not go away, this breathlessness, this stiffening? Where is the thing, and how might you begin to channel it elsewhere? The difference between anxiety and excitement is you, your perception, your projections, your distrust. You need new things. We need new tools, new ways of working it through. We need new pathways from our memories to here. We need new systems, new responses to the things that were and are no more. The first thing to do is feel. And that's what we're here to do today. To ask, where was the pattern formed? To locate it, to notice the disconnects, and to feel our way towards new tools, new systems, new responses. And I'll invite you to gently begin to come back to your body if you haven't already. And as you gently open the eyes, perhaps taking a moment to scan your space, orienting to the doors, the windows, letting our bodies know that we are safe right now. And then as you are ready, we'll begin to move into our session together. So given everything that has unfolded in the past 4 months, all the different ways that we are seeing the evils of Western powers, so-called democracies, I've been thinking a lot about how and in what ways we can do crisis differently. Right now, many organizers, academics, cultural workers, healers, everyday people agree that this is the biggest mass mobilization of decolonization we have yet to experience in our lifetime. And with that, what we're also seeing is the alarming rise in censorship, repression, mis and disinformation, propaganda, and it's all getting increasingly heinous. And what I have been asking myself is, when there is crisis and emergency, when people are genuinely scared and people want to help, that's a beautiful thing. And in the hands of the wrong actor, we can be manipulated and harmed, and perhaps even convinced to harm in ways that we didn't consent to. And so this workshop came out of asking myself, how can rest help us develop skills for navigating darkness, uncertainty, and crisis? How do we discern the signal from the noise by coming back to our bodies, so that we each can figure out our next best action step that allows us to be accountable to and in alignment with our values and the world that we most want to create? And so when I thought about that question and what I have to uniquely offer, what I came to is this deep feeling in my belly that we must liberate how we currently conceptualize and understand rest from Western notions of peace, which have for centuries and still to this day continue to imprison our imagination, as well as the bodies of all living beings, both human and the more than human world. So we have 3 intentions for our time together today. We'll be unpacking the hidden creative potential and the etymology of crisis. We will destabilize and decenter Western notions of peace that perpetuate violence on people on the planet. And we will come into right relationship with rest as a liberatory practice for personal and political unrest. And you'll walk away today having learned a tool that you can keep in your pocket and use every day to support you in continuing to dismantle and disrupt the ways that Western notions of peace prevent you, me, everyone around us from feeling like we can actually slow down, take care of ourselves, and listen to the wisdom of our bodies. And so let's start with the etymology of crisis. I ended up looking up the origin of this word across two different sources. And so from the early 15th century, some of the earlier definitions include a decisive point in the progress of a disease, also a vitally important or decisive state of things, that a point at which change must come for better or worse. Other definitions include a turning point in a disease, the change which indicates recovery or death. It also means a judgment, also to separate, divide, and to discriminate or distinguish. And so when I look at this definition of crisis, and when I remove this binary of good and bad and right and wrong, what I see here is that crisis, there might actually be a grace in crisis, right? That vitally important or decisive state of things, a point at which change must come for better or worse, a change which might indicate recovery or death. And then I went to Wikipedia and I also saw a couple other definitions that I wanted to share. It might be a crucial turning point, an unstable situation, a sudden change in the course of a disease, a traumatic or stressful change, right? And stressful doesn't have to be good or bad. And a point in a drama at which a conflict reaches a peak before being resolved. And so when I personally look at what my life right now looks like, the things that we are contending with as a country, and I think about back to when I was a child, the world that I thought I was inheriting and the world that I'm actually experiencing right now are pretty radically different. And I have seen over the past 10 years just the evisceration of social supports, the continued attacks on communities of color. We've experienced the overturning of Roe v. Wade, abortion being illegal, anti-trans legislation, ongoing police brutality, and the militarization of the police. And so in my perspective, and I know for many of us who are here today, things have gotten worse and worse and worse and worse for the so-called for the largest empire in history, those of us in the US. And so for me, when I look at this last definition, a point in a drama at which a conflict reaches a peak before it being resolved, I find that there might be there might be a saving grace, and perhaps there could be something really interesting when we explore crisis outside of not only the negative connotations that Western notions of peace are placing on this moment, but also, I think, asking ourselves what creative potential might be on the table that previously wasn't there when we remove the shackles of Western notions of peace. And so to support each of us, where did my screen go? To support each of us on that, I invite you to grab a piece of paper and we're going to take the next 10 minutes to do some journaling. And I invite you to recall a time in the past of your life when you experienced a crisis. It can be either a personal crisis, dark night of the soul, a death of a loved one, health scare, Or maybe it was a shared crisis that you experienced personally. Hurricane Katrina, 2008 recession, climate change. I invite you to think about, what did the crisis put an end to and what new beginnings emerged? What did you learn or gain from going through it? And how does it affect your life today? And how do you define or differentiate crisis versus change? So I'm offering 3 prompts up here, but I invite you to pick and choose the ones that resonate. There is no pressure to respond to all. There's also no right or wrong way to go through this workshop. Overall, you're welcome to participate in any way that resonates for you. But we'll take 10 minutes here to do a little bit of journaling, and then I'll invite, if you feel comfortable, for us to share either in the chat box or you can unmute. So we'll have a little bit of space for sharing with each other what our explorations of crisis is revealing. We'll have about 1 more minute. And if you would like to, I'll invite you to either take some time to share a reflection in the chat. I offer a prompt of what creative potential did you unearth in your exploration of crisis? You're also welcome to raise your hand or unmute if you'd like to share. I'm also curious if anything interesting came up for folks in this reflection.
I can go. My name's Ruchi, guys. I I think I was initially really stumped to define a crisis. Um, Mainly because I think it was the juxtaposition of crisis and change. Crisis currently is like a panic. Like I've had panics, but I think the second question of like what did I gain from it really kind of stumped me. But then it forced me to kind of view different periods of my life differently, I guess. I ended up reflecting a lot about the changes I made. I was in the middle of, I had just graduated, um, the pandemic hit, and then I was forced to kind of really sit with myself and decide of where I wanted to go. And I ended up scrapping all my plans, which was a lot of very expensive tuition that I threw down the drain. But I also like was learned it would really redefine how I viewed my self-worth in a non-hustle culture, ambitious lifestyle. Um, that was very difficult and hard. And then having to confront it internally and then externally when you have to tell people was really weird. Um, but that was kind of like what I was thinking about. But it was yeah, that's all I kind of got. Still kind of thinking upon those prompts.
Thank you for being honest, Ruchi. I think you captured the reality that this prompt was just really, I mean, it's difficult. And I mean, I hope that it was difficult in a way that felt like it invited some challenge of like maybe things we haven't thought about in a while, or maybe things that we haven't refreshed our own definitions around, or maybe places where we've been internalizing someone else's definition of crisis, perhaps a definition that has been offered to us by our media and government, for example. Um, and so you so aptly named that juxtaposition of crisis and change being challenging. And that's not a place that I'm sitting in too. I'm like, what is the difference between crisis and change? And I don't have a solid answer, and I'm not sure it's about having a solid answer, but at least where I've landed right now is um, I have a series of questions I've been asking myself. Like, is crisis the wake up call that I didn't necessarily choose? Does crisis exist to compel us to look at things, places, aspects of ourselves that we'd rather look away from? Is crisis a transformative, potentially non-consensual, there's no going back type of change that forces a deep reckoning? I don't know. I'm in this questioning with you. So thank you, Ruchi. Just looking at the chat. Lindsay, I wrote about how the death of my dad at a young age birthed my exploration and grief. and over time has led me towards finding purpose in grief work. Oh, that's so, so beautiful. Ashley, your example of Dark Night of the Soul gave language to something I couldn't voice before. Thank you. I believe that that term was initially coined in a religious setting, but it's now pretty colloquially used as pure. I mean, I guess it's self-explanatory. And for those of us who might have been through a Saturn return before, or maybe you're in the thick of one, I know many people describe their Saturn return as a dark night of the soul. A betrayal, L says, a betrayal from a loved one has helped me free myself to contemplate jumping into a big new life chapter that doesn't compromise my needs. Yes. And so I invite us all to just give ourselves permission to continue being in the wondering and in the exploration of our own definitions of crisis and change. I think that being able to differentiate for ourselves is going to be really important, so that we can root down and really figure out where we want to be mobilizing and spending our energy and investing in the changes that we want to see. Penelope, the creative potential is in how do I rebuild a life for the person I am, not the person I should be. Christ is laying bare what's important. Oh, that's so rich. Right. A lot of amazing shares here, Jacqueline and Bean. I do have to move on, but everyone please take a moment to hop in there and read incredible shares. And so now that we have had a chance to orient around some older definitions of crisis and explore what our own definitions are or have been or might be or are becoming, maybe your definition is actually being in the process of change right now. We're going to be moving into this next chapter of our time together where we're going to start destabilizing Western notions of peace. And so what I have here on the screen are multiple Instagram posts that I have seen recently, which I have found very fascinating because we're here in this moment where we're seeing how Western notions of peace are implicated in and actually exist to uphold white supremacy, colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, ableism, and patriarchy. And many of us who've been either aware or attuned to this, I think, are using this moment to really speak to, quite honestly, the bullshit, right? Like, as an American citizen, speaking for myself, like, I get so pissed off hearing Biden and the administration dare to even say any words involving peace or democracy or justice, when the truth is they are sending billions in aid as well as ongoing sending weapons to Israel so that it can literally destroy and genocide Gaza. And so my hope is that in this session, we'll be able to understand like how it is that these countries, these Western powers can continue to say or hold to lay claim on the word peace. And what we might want to do to start to separate the ways in which we've internalized those definitions. And so some of these quotes you might have already seen in the pre-read. This top right one in the white comes from Caitlin Johnstone's really incredible Medium piece on I think you don't want peace, you want obedience. And I also really love the succinctness of Brittany Packnett's quote: in the wake of oppression, the powerful will ask the oppressed to choose peace. And what they really mean is order. Peace requires justice. And so each of these posts is pointing to various aspects of Western notions of peace. Western notions of peace require respectability politics, purity values, not ruffling feathers, not pissing off the state, allowing billionaires to continue to be at the very top while everyone else suffers, not disrupting the current social hierarchy. That's what Western notions of peace value. They also value property over people. They want free reign to rape the earth. They want to be able to build pipelines. They want to be able to bomb anybody they deem a threat. And we as the people are standing up and now saying no. And I think there's this really big reckoning and realization that Western notions of peace have always been bullshit. And people in the struggle globally are really seeing this play out right now. And so let's take a little trip in a time machine and start to circle back to how we got here. How did these Western notions of peace emerge? So over the next 2 slides, I'm going to be reading a quote from a piece that I'm going to be sending out in the post-session resources. It's a Medium article called How the Enlightenment Separated Humanity from Nature. As someone who studied political theory in undergrad, I basically studied a lot of these old dead men from this period. And so I invite you to just sit back and I will share with you these quotes. And this reads, "The empire of reason can be traced back to the 17th century and the dualism of René Descartes. In order to progress scientifically, a distinction had to be made between the intractable problems of self-consciousness and the objective, measurable world. Descartes proposed a solution. The entire world was to be reduced entirely to measure and number, the founding reductionist principles of science, save for human minds, God and angels. The consequences of this decision, that every aspect of nature except for the human being could be determined entirely through the methods of science, would define the relationship between human beings and the objective world for centuries. Through his Cartesian dualism, which enabled the flourishing of modern science by removing psyche from the world." And when they say removing psyche, that means also removing animism, removing the fact that everything on this planet that is alive and has its own consciousness. Descartes inadvertently structured modern science to conceive of the human being as outside of nature. And this quote is really chilling because we're also seeing the ongoing dehumanization of the Palestinians, right? As well as the ongoing dehumanization of Black and Brown people right here where I live on US soil. But the dehumanization is critical. It's a critical piece in order to justify genocide. If people are animals, they this sort of ideology then justifies the control of said animals. This other quote is also equally chilling, and it reads, "Francis Bacon, a legendary classical liberal and scientific thinker, gave this separation a deeper element of sinister power fantasy. If humankind was distinct from the natural world, then we could in fact treat it as our servant or slave. The sciences would be aimed towards the development of new technology, the contortions and enslavement of nature made to suit our alien human whims. Bacon wrote that the scientists must steal the secrets of nature in Promethean fashion." Promethean refers to the Greek god Prometheus, who was, I believe, tortured by Zeus, as torture may compel an unwilling witness to reveal what he has been concealing. I literally have goosebumps as I read this because earlier this week, I know many of us saw the awful photos of naked Palestinian men being tortured by IDF soldiers. And so we're seeing this happen to people in Gaza. We're seeing this happen to the planet. And we have been seeing this happen to many historically marginalized communities as well. I also think about in America, the legacy of scientific experimentation on enslaved people, on Black bodies. And so this Enlightenment era continues to reverberate really heinous, evil, cruel echoes that we can still find evidence of in our modern day life, our contemporary life. And so when we go back to that 17th century, this also like related to the time when a lot of European colonizers were starting to go out and quote unquote discover the new world. What we learn then is the Western notions of peace that we are hearing and seeing today, that many of us feel a lot of cognitive dissonance around, they are founded upon these Enlightenment era values and ideologies. Some of them that I will name for you include rationalism, right? This was the era of reason being dominant and preferred and supreme over intuition, feeling, and sensing. Rationalism is supported by mind-body separation, which came from René Descartes' work. It's also known as Cartesian dualism. And this not only normalizes disembodiment, but places the separation of mind and body on a pedestal. It creates mind supremacy. And it is supported by rationalism. And we can see it play out in many ways in our society right now. It also valued individualism over collectivism. During the Enlightenment era, there was a lot of thinking around man's relationship to God and religion in the church. And eventually ideas that would come out later from this include like manifest destiny, right? Which led to the genocide of indigenous peoples here on Turtle Island, North America. And so it was the idea that like the individual human being was supreme. And of course, man over nature, as we just learned from Francis Bacon's work. Man being separate from nature, nature being something to subdue, control, exploit, and make his own. And we're also seeing this play out with the space wars. One of my mentors just told me yesterday, I haven't looked it up, so I don't know if it's true, but SpaceX is trying to find ways to mine water out of the moon. I am terrified of the potential of having moon wars, countries fighting over resources on the moon. But this is the reality of the moment that we are in. A lot of these ideas are reaching limits of the natural world, and we're seeing a lot of. That's why we're seeing a lot of collapse, decay, conflict, and crisis. And so what we can gather from this little trip back in history and this connecting history to the moment right now is that there is a personal and political cost of Western peace on the individual body, as well as our collective bodies. That means what we're experiencing and learning is that all bodies, human more than human, as well as, of course, the planet, the land, are shouldering the burden and paying the price so that certain people get to benefit from and hold on to the death to Western notions of peace, which are killing all of us. And it's here that I want to uplift a quote by Kwame Ture, which says, "There's a difference between peace and liberation, is there not? You can have injustice and have peace. So peace isn't the answer. Liberation is the answer." Peace, or that's the white man's word, peace. Liberation is our word. So in this next portion of our time together, we're going to be thinking about is how these Western notions of peace have trained us to expect rest, to look a certain way. Otherwise, we're not doing it right, or otherwise it's not worth doing at all. And my hope is that we can start to liberate rest from the chains of Western peace, so we can come into right relationship with it. And I'll echo again, as I did in the beginning of the session, we must liberate how we conceptualize and understand rest from Western notions of peace that imprison our imagination and the bodies of all living beings. So in this next section, I'm going to lay out for you a little bit about the cultural erasure of rest, the cost of surviving the cultural erasure of rest, all of it leading up to how we can work with rest in times of crisis and change. And so I want to start with something that ought to be obvious, that is no longer obvious as a result of the ongoing degradation of rest. In some ways, we can even trace the cultural erasure of rest back to the Enlightenment era, because if the body is inferior to the mind, then the body's needs are not important. Then what the body longs for and desires, and the different ways that the body is rebellious or errant, all of those things need to be controlled under Enlightenment ideals. And we still see this with colonial Western psychology and psychiatry, right? We see this with the way that disabled people are often relegated to the shadows of our society and not our society is not inclusive of. We see this echo out in many different ways. And so I continue to invite you to think about, where am I seeing this today, right now? And so human beings we're born to need rest. Rest is our birthright. And for those of you who know Trisha Hersey of the Nat Ministry, and those of you who don't, I highly recommend following at the Nat Ministry on Instagram. Trisha, my work would not be possible without Trisha. I consider myself a little tiny branch off of her incredible tree. And if you read her book, Rest as Resistance, a manifesto, it will really help you to orient around the fact that rest connects us to our dignity, divinity, and humanity. But human beings are biologically designed to need rest, the exact same way that we are designed to eat food, drink water, eliminate waste, sleep, and crave connection with others. Notice I said need. It's not a luxury. It's not a nice to have. We literally need it. Except the one thing that makes rest a little different from these other needs I've named on the screen is you can go without rest, and it's going to be a lot longer before you have to foot the bill. Versus, like, let's say if you didn't eat food for a day, you definitely will feel it. If you didn't drink water for a day, you definitely will feel it. Same with eliminating waste, same with sleep. And so that also, I think, gives some context as to why rest can be really challenging. In this culture, in this credit and debt-based culture, many of us have learned to use our bodies the way that capital has taught us to use everything. We rack up credit and we just push off the bill till later. And maybe later comes years from now, maybe later comes as a health crisis, right? And so when I look at the US alone, I got this data from the Sleep Institute back in 2022. And from that, I learned that millions of people struggle to rest and sleep. And we know this by looking at different sleep disorders and the number of people who have them. So when we are struggling to sleep as we're naturally designed to, the question is not, why am I bad at rest? Why are we bad at rest? That's actually not a very helpful or nor is it an accurate question. The question should actually be, what are the conditions that have made it unsafe for us to rest? That have made it unsafe for me, my family, my people, my community, other people who don't look like me, other people who do. All of us are experiencing these conditions, albeit with different privileges and different challenges. So how do we know that we're designed for rest? This is where we can look at our biological rhythms. Most of us here are going to be familiar with the circadian rhythm. It's one that recurs every 24 hours. And the most popular one we're familiar with is our sleep and wake cycle. And we also have two other rhythms. The infradian rhythm includes cycles longer than 24 hours, and the menstrual cycle is an example. And we also have ultradian rhythms. These are rhythms that occur multiple times within one 24-hour period. And one of those rhythms that we're going to talk about today is the basic rest and activity cycle. So in the 1950s, a sleep researcher named Nathaniel Kleitman learned that the human body moves through these 90 to 120 minutes-ish cycles. I say ish because human bodies are incredibly complex and diverse. So there's no way that you can ever actually transpose like a strict and rigid numerical range. But at about every 90 to 120 minutes, that's the average. When we're asleep at night, these cycles are corresponding to different depths of sleep: REM, non-REM, deep, light. It regulates dreaming, memory consolidation, all the juicy good stuff that happens during sleep. And during the day, these cycles are also happening, but instead of regulating different stages of dreaming, they are corresponding to different levels of energy, focus, concentration, awareness, alertness, right? So I don't know about you, but every day after lunch, I always go into this like serious lull where I like I'm a little sleepy, I'm lethargic, I have very little desire to do work, honestly. But I still remember all the times in my life before I worked for myself where it didn't matter if I felt that way. There was shit to do, and I had to push through. And so that's typically the period of time where you see folks like reaching for that second or third cup of coffee, or maybe like that energy drink, or maybe we're like snacking to cope with the fact that we couldn't actually take the break that our bodies needed, whatever it is. Um, this is also, when we're moving through these cycles, there's also, if you ever find yourself kind of like, what is it called? I do this a lot. If you like find yourself walking to the kitchen, you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. Or you're like looking out the window, you're kind of daydreaming, or maybe you find yourself on Reddit or Instagram. Those are all past instances where your body was experiencing that natural fluctuation of energy. So if you look at this chart, that period of time where I'm talking about, where you start to like wane in your ability to stay focused and deep in the work, that's when you're on the downside of the hill. So you're going towards that valley where it says ultradian healing response. So the basic rest and activity cycle helps us to account for the natural ebb and flow of our energy throughout the. And every time we hit like that 90 to 120-minute mark, there's a point where the body begins to crave a period of rest and recovery. It's usually that point in time where your body wants to pull focus, zone out. You need something else. You need to get away from the screen, get away from the deep work. Um, of course, our bodies are also resilient, right? If we don't have the freedom or the safety to do so, we can push through, but it comes with a cost. See, if we don't honor that natural desire for 5, 10, 15, 20-minute break when we feel it, what happens is in order for you to skip the downside and just stay in high performance, the body has to generate stress hormones that are normally utilized for fight or flight in order to override the cue. Because what the body is interpreting that override means, or perhaps the fact that we're not slowing down as, well, there's something else that's more important than us taking care of our bodies, right? And this is very normal. This happens to so many of us who have to work in this capitalist system. And that's typically also why by the time you finish your workday, even if you didn't chug 10 cups of coffee, some of us might feel extremely wound up and tight and tense. We might feel very in our head. We might not have had much time or space to reconnect with the body. We might feel anxious. And it can also, in this state, it can flare up a lot of our existing mental health conditions. And so over time, this is what chronic stress is, and this is what eventually leads to burnout. You can think of burnout as over time, just continually not being able to or not giving ourselves the rest that our bodies are naturally calling for. And so I offer you this basic rest and activity cycle as a tool, as a framework. And I invite you to just start to think about the next time you start to feel, quote unquote, the urge to procrastinate. By the way, procrastination is a lie. I just want to uplift a book called Laziness Does Not Exist by Dr. Devin Price, who is a trans social psychologist out of Chicago. Incredible book. But basically, capitalism and these Western notions of peace, they have vilified that very natural need to activate the ultradian healing response by calling it procrastination and calling it laziness. It ensures that most of us who fear for our survival are going to override ourselves. And so, what is the cost of growing up in a world where we didn't have role models for rest, where we were never taught how to rest? It was never talked about in a positive way, and we might not have ever been around people or environments where it was affirmed or even prioritized. And so, on top of that, many of us who enter the workplace or even academia or even K through 12 schooling, it starts that early. We also started to learn through social cues and norms different ways in which we were not allowed to be, different ways in which our bodies had to be policed and controlled in order for decorum or etiquette, right? So all of this all together, I kind of put under the bucket of costs of survival. So I want to share with you a little bit about why rest is such a powerful and important liberatory practice. So as human beings, all of us have access to 4 innate forms of intelligence. You can also call these ways of knowing. So we have obviously the mind, cognition, logic, problem solving, maybe more linear thinking. Um, we also have the heart, our capacity to feel, to love, to care without the bounds of time and space, right? So many of us are heartbroken for people we have never met across the world. So many of us are waking up every day checking Instagram to see if our favorite journalists are alive. We also have the body, capacity to sense, right? We have the 5 senses, but we also have other senses like intuition, like your vestibular, that's the balance, sense of balance. You also have your sense of body in space. And last but not least, you also have the soul. And that is your capacity to imagine or dream, to conceive of things that are not here right now, to make up worlds. But if we are constantly on the go, busy, booked and busy, overstimulated, distracting ourselves, overworking, over caretaking, what happens is a cost of moving really fast is that we become less sensitized to our inner worlds. And our inner world is where so much of our experience of the outer world is happening. And when we're less sensitized to that inner world, what also happens is we start to lose connection to our body's language, our body's form of communication. It's like trying to learn a new language. If you don't practice for several years, you eventually lose your fluency. And body language fluency comes through our ability to make sense of and track and observe our physical sensations, emotions, and thoughts. That's essentially what your somatic experience is, how your mind, heart, body, and soul, what they all have to say when you bring them together. And so, in a world where we didn't learn about rest, where we don't see it modeled to us, where our ability to survive and pay the bills is predicated upon how much we're willing and able to exploit ourselves, all of this leads to us being disconnected from our bodies, disconnected from our needs. And the thing is, when you start to feel disconnected from your body and your needs, you start to mistrust your body's language, the cues. You don't know what the signals mean. They might even start to scare you or unnerve you or become things that you control and push away. And this positions you to start to look for answers outside of yourself. This is also where capitalism wants you to think about self-care, wants you to look to the market for solutions to your suffering. But all of those solutions on the market are only going to continue to, they're not rooted in you actually coming home to yourself. They're rooted in quick fixes, things that you can buy to feel momentary relief while you're still being lied to, while you're still not being actually led to more freedom or more rest. And so the cost of survival I really want to center our exploration on today is when we're disconnected from the body, we're also disconnecting from 3 out of 4 innate forms of intelligence. And this means that we are effectively disabled in our decision making. Mind, heart, body, and soul, these are our faculties we have, capacities for knowing, ways of knowing. You might even think about them as like the 4 directions in a compass. But if you don't have as much connection to heart, body, and soul, if you have forgotten the language of how those parts speak, you're not making your decisions with all of the information, the full potential that of your divine human body. And so that to me is why rest is so important in this moment. Rest is a way for us to come back home to invite those four ways of knowing, those four forms of intelligence, to be in communication again, and for us to be in communication with them. And so I want to share with you two definitions of rest. You might think of them as practical and philosophical, or you might think of them as the personal and the political. So the practical or personal definition is probably the one you'll be working on most in your everyday life. And what I want to offer is that rest is anything that allows those four ways of knowing to come together, to be in communication, for you to touch into them. So whether this happens through napping, through dancing, through poetry, through going on a jog, through hiking, through staring at a fire, it doesn't matter. It's going to look myriad different ways because there are billions of different bodies on this planet. It doesn't matter as long as you are connecting and returning to yourself and you are touching into your ability to sense, feel, dream, imagine, as well as think and process. And the philosophical definition I offer as the why the hell does this matter, right? What is the big picture? And the big picture, the reason why there's a lot at stake when it comes to rest, crisis, peace, justice, is this. Rest helps you to connect with who and how you naturally are when there are no demands on your being. Rest helps you get in touch with the version of you that no matter what these systems try to do, there's still a part of you that could never actually be fully controlled or subdued. Rest is also about abiding in, creating time to drop into what it's like to experience a version of you that is outside the bounds of Western notions of peace and outside of these systems of oppression or systems of unrest, as I like to call them. And when you think about the state of the world we're in right now, for example, sweeping anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ legislation, for example, overturning of abortion, you might think about all of these as different communities that are being policed and told how to be, and different communities of people who are targeted, who are not allowed to be who and how they naturally are. And so if we want to create a world where more of us can be who and how we naturally are with no demands on our being, we must have our own relationship to rest. We must first know who and how we are for ourselves. Because there's information, there's wisdom, there's intelligence, there is stuff hidden under those decades of burnout and exhaustion and unprocessed grief. There's creative potential that awaits us in rest. And so under these systems of unrest, the truth is we will never, ever get the conditions to feel safe enough to slow down, because Western notions of peace depend on our continued oppression and subjugation. The cog in the wheel doesn't turn without our bodies and our labor and our money. And so when I was conceiving of this workshop, I was really thinking about the difference between rest in peace and rest in crisis and change. We don't have peace, at least not a peace, unless it's a peace that we are creating for ourselves and with our community and in our private spaces, perhaps. But as a collective, as a global peoples, and on a planet, we do not have peace right now. And so I invite us to really think about the cost of expecting or waiting for a world where we're putting off our rest until we have certain conditions. And I invite you to think about whether that's actually even feasible for your body. And with this hidden creative potential within crisis that we have been exploring together, maybe it's not about needing certain conditions. Maybe rest is a way to move through crisis. What if we could learn to rest in crisis and change, trusting that rest is going to reveal new sensitivities, new skills, new possibilities that we never could have imagined in our state of waking burnout and waking pushing and forcing? How can we make space for rest to show us the way to liberation? And that's an inquiry that I invite you into. So I wanted to just take a moment to drop or share this framework with you. This is a framework I've been developing over the past 3 years. It's the framework that I've been also testing out in my group program, Rewriting Our Rest Stories, where I work with Asian women and femmes to free themselves from lineages of intergenerational burnout through rest. And essentially, because the things that we're talking about are political in nature, I do not believe any of us can really meaningfully come into right relationship with rest alone. We actually really, really need collective rest. We need to do this together. And here's why. So in just a moment, we're going to be exploring an activity that helps you with this self structure, right? This is a circle on the inside. And so one way to start to liberate yourself from these Western notions of peace and to find out what you need to feel safe enough to slow down is to find ways to disrupt the status quo, to make the invisible visible, and to create a daily practice where you prioritize checking in with your inner world. So that whatever you can do that achieves those means within your individual self and your life, and if you can find small, even 5 minutes a day ways to touch into that or to explore that, that can go a really long way. And we also, in order to sustain our self efforts, we also need access to some form of a community structure. Community doesn't have to be 100 people. Your community could be 1 or 2 people in your life who you're willing to continue questioning hustle culture with, questioning Western notions of peace, questioning the ways in which your body and being is imprisoned by these systems of unrest. People with whom you can just be honest about how tired you are, how heartbroken you are, and how hungry you are for change, right? And so what we need as the communal structure that can support the courage and the resilience that we need to keep doing our inner work is access to rest affirming culture, access to rest affirming community, and access to rest affirming stories. Conversations where we're destigmatizing rest, where we're really reinserting it, reintegrating it into its rightful place in our understanding of what it means to be human. And that's what we're doing here today. Here you are experiencing a rest affirming culture, community, and stories. And so I want to share with you a very, very practical tool that you can use in your everyday life to help with that self-structure piece. And so this practice is great because it kind of touches upon the 3 here. It helps you to make a daily practice of checking with your inner world, which is already disrupting the status quo, because the status quo is to not check in with ourselves. And we're making the invisible visible because this practice is going to be one of you putting words to your somatic experience. And so I'm going to walk us through this exercise and then I'll guide you through the before portion and what do you need. And then once this workshop comes to a close, I invite you to take an action based on what you've discovered that you might need, and you will fill out the after portion after you have taken the action. So the idea is the before portion of this practice is about kind of attuning, almost like checking in and be like, hey, what's going on? And based on what you write down, you're going to get a picture of what's going on that will point you to maybe some ideas of what you might need for relief, whatever it is that you're experiencing. And then the after log is important because that's going to help you start to track the effectiveness of whatever it is that you chose to do. And you're going to be able to compare relative to before how it helped your body to either rest or feel more settled, feel more grounded, etc. So my recommendation would be for if you would like, if you have the desire to, I would recommend getting a separate journal and seeing if you can commit to doing this practice once a day for 2 to 4 weeks. They say it takes like what, 2 weeks to build a new habit. But this practice is quite literally going to help you reconnect with your body's language and start to practice that fluency again. I'm also going to take a moment to drop in the chat two resources that will help you with this after I walk us through the instructions. So grab a piece of paper and I invite you to copy this template. I'll be sending you a copy of this in the post-session resource email, but for now, I invite you to just copy the template so that we can practice together. And I will look for those resources that I meant to share. Okay, so in the chat, I'm going to drop two resources. One is a body sensations, feelings, and needs list by Meenakshi. They're a South Asian decolonial nonviolent communication facilitator. I did a training with them a couple years ago, and I just really love this tool. And so I invite you to look at it because in the beginning, sometimes it can be hard to maybe come up with the words that would describe our inner world. And as a lot of Brene Brown's research from her book Atlas of the Heart, I also recommend the HBO special. She talks about the importance of being able to name what we feel because that's the first step of actually being able to take action. We have to actually be able to name it. So that body sensations and feelings list can be helpful there. And the emotion wheel I shared is the same thing. I like it because it's color coded and it can just help us give language to our emotions. And then once you kind of copy down that template, I invite you to fill out the before part of your log, your somatic check-in log. I'll just give you an example here that I did in the past. So scale is where you're rating on a scale of 1 to 10 how stressed you are. I think I deleted the slide that had the definition, but I'll make sure I put that in the resource email. So scale, on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed am I? And then you can think of the acronyms SET. So we have SET and setting. SET stands for sensation, emotion, thought. Can you list at least one sensation, one emotion, and one thought that you're having? And then the setting is the overall context that you're in. So this practice includes scale, set, setting. We'll take about 2 more minutes just to complete our first go at this practice. And after you fill out your before portion, I invite you to reflect on some ideas as to what you might be able to do to just help address some of what you're noticing that you're feeling. What would offer relief? What would be helpful? Whoops, I just realized I was talking with mute on. I was asking if anybody has any questions about the somatic check-in that I can answer or clarify while we're here together. Okay. Well, if you do, know that you have my email and you're encouraged to email me, and I'd be happy to circle back and answer if I can. Um, as we begin to come to a close, I'm really sad. 90 minutes blows by so fast. There's so much here. But I do want to share that this is I think, a workshop I'm going to continue iterating. I think it's one that I feel my body and spirit is telling me this is one that the collective and I just need to be in continual questioning and exploration of. And so I'm playing around with the idea of offering this on a quarterly basis and kind of just seeing how we as a collective are supporting each other as we move through crisis and change. But I want to just thank you for taking the time to be here with me today. And I want to close out by this really inspiring quote by Dr. Bayo Okomolafe, who those of you who follow my newsletter know that I fangirl his work so hard. I'm like always quoting him. He's a really big influence. And this quote reads, "I think the stability afforded to us by whiteness." And when he talks about whiteness in his post-activism work, he separates it away from whiteness as an identity or skin color. He's talking about it as a construction that even white people are trapped in. The social arrangement that stole not just Black bodies, but white bodies, brown bodies, mottled and fungal bodies. And that mottled and fungal bodies part also talks, he's referring to the natural world. The stability afforded to us by whiteness is hollowing out. White stability is flailing. Something is pulling the seams apart. A geophilosophical force is disengineering the machine, disrupting the myth that we are stable individuals, overwhelming our borders and boundaries. That obstacle, that impediment, that glitch, that crack, that thing that gets in the way is wisdom. Yes, wisdom is not so much a profusion of knowledge as it is a transversal disruption of knowing. Wisdom is what remains when we've come to the end of everything we know. Wisdom is where the arched back of the road rises and stretches, withdrawing its endorsement of convenient human mobility. Wisdom is where the world kicks back. Wisdom signals the passing of a wild, troubling thing. And what I find really cool is when you replace the word wisdom with crisis, I feel like the paragraph still stands. Crisis is not so much a profusion of knowledge as it is a transversal disruption of knowing. Crisis is what remains when we've come to the end of everything we know. Crisis is where the arched back of the road rises and stretches, withdrawing its endorsement of convenient human mobility. Crisis is where the world kicks back. Crisis signals the passing of a wild, troubling thing. So thank you for playing and exploring and venturing into this liminal space with me to explore crisis and change. Like I said, I'll be sharing a follow-up email. I'll be including some resources. I would also love your feedback on this workshop. So if you have anything you want to share, hit reply, let me know. I want to take your feedback into consideration as I continue to iterate on this free offering for the community. And last but not least, enrollment for the spring 2024 cohort of Rewriting Our Best Stories will be opening up on Monday, February 12th. So if you are a tired API woman or femme, or if you know any tired, burned out API women or femmes who are interested in liberating themselves and their lineage through rest, please share that with them. Otherwise, I hope to see you at a community rest session this month. I have one on the 15th and the 19th, totally free. We're going to be exploring the roots of restlessness, so it's kind of connected to this. Also, Postcards for Palestine on Monday. My friend Kim and I are collaborating for that. And you can sign up on the community rest session page as well. I think I saw a question. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to stay on for like another 5-10 minutes. I know we hit time. Oh, yes, in the post-session email, I'll also share my Venmo and PayPal. I'm tracking all donations and I'll share with the community. I'll actually drop it in the chat for now. I'll share in the newsletter where we're at with the scholarship fund and then announce winners in the beginning of March. But if you want to make a donation to contribute to the financial aid fund, that would be so appreciated. We were able to give away a full scholarship to a disabled and sick community member who can't work last fall, as well as 2 partial scholarships for people who are really under-resourced. So I appreciate that so much. And I'm just rolling up in the chat. Okay, Kimberly. Question is, do you mean rest as in doing nothing or doing some productive or creative work during rest? I would invite you, as well as all of us, to question where we got the idea that rest is doing nothing. And this is part of our ongoing curiosity and inquiry into Western notions of peace, right? If you recall that slide with the Enlightenment ideals, where mind-body dualism, it essentially means that, as an extension of that, our culture only values things that are tangible, things that can make money, things that can be seen. But anything invisible, like feelings, intuition, our inner worlds, are often vilified and policed. And so, what I would want to say to that is, rest is not a state of doing nothing. Rest is a state of letting things be done unto you. Rest is letting nature do you. Rest is returning to your natural state. So you're not doing, you're being, but in the beingness, nature is doing you, if that makes sense. And I know it's not going to feel like that in the beginning. So I also just want to normalize in the beginning, for many of us, what I would recommend is just carving out time to put yourself in the posture of rest and try your best not to make it mean something if it doesn't feel restful. Because in the beginning, if you think, the metaphor I like to say is that think of your body as like you have a relationship with your body, but your body might be, depending on your relationship to rest, maybe you haven't called home in a long time. Maybe you haven't spent a lot of time in this body, right? And so when you're trying to like reignite a relationship, most of us would agree that it's pretty unrealistic to expect that, like, if I haven't been calling you and I'm talking to you very much, you're probably not going to pick up on the first call. And so it's really funny. I know a lot, I myself included, a lot of us come to rest and we're like, I finally picked up the fucking phone. Why aren't you here? Why isn't it restful? Why don't I feel amazing? And it's like, yeah, but your body's got some feelings about that. It's got some shit to say. And you and your body are gonna go through a process of trusting each other again. And it requires consistency and just showing up. And so in the beginning, put yourself in the rest posture and try to be unattached to what it looks like in the outcome. Because as long, even if your rest doesn't feel restful, it's not because you're doing it quote unquote wrong. It's because there's just a lot of loud noise, things that are competing for your attention now that you have made the time and space for them to come forward. So I hope that's helpful. And please feel free to unmute if you have any other questions. I'm just scanning the chat. Mika, could you elaborate a bit more on the attuning exercise for which you just shared the template with us? I got lost. Yes. Are you referring to the somatic check-in, Mika? I think this is the one. Okay. So this is a practice that I invite each of you to consider trying out. Maybe doing it once a day for at least 2 weeks, if you can, maybe going for as long as 4 weeks. And the invitation is, all you need is a piece of paper. And what you'll do is you'll sit down, you'll draw out this table, this template here. And then you will firstly log your before portion. And so you're going to write the date and time, and then you're going to take a moment and rate on a scale of 1 to 10. That's what the scale part is for. It's my fault. I deleted the slide on accident that actually explains it. So I'll write it here. And so for scale, you're just taking a moment to check in and you're self-assessing on a scale of 1 to 10 how stressed you are. Remember, it's not about right and wrong. You're just taking a moment to assess yourself. And then I invite you to write down at least one physical sensation one emotion that you're feeling and one thought pattern, one thought you're noticing. It might be a pattern or it might be something else. And then the setting piece is, what is the context around you? Like what's happening that might be influencing this scale and setting the scale and set sensations, emotions, and thoughts. So you can see here in this example that I did on this particular day, I rated myself a 7 out of 10. Some of the sensations I noticed was I had a racing heartbeat, my neck and shoulders were really tight, and my jaw was clenched. The emotions I felt, I was anxious, irritable, and down. And my thoughts were in the flavor of nothing's going right now. Everything feels like a struggle. That's how I usually know I'm spiraling too. I'm like in that, like, it's the shitter kind of place. And the setting, the context around me was I was running behind on a deadline for work and it was 3 p.m. in the afternoon and I still hadn't eaten lunch. And so when I logged my before log that day, when I went to the what do I need part, that's when I was like, oh, I probably need to put this work down, or maybe I need to communicate. I need more time on the deadline. I need to eat. I probably also need to drink water if I haven't been eating. And so that's an example of like the things that I wrote down and what do I need? And then go off and do them, right? Like we're writing them down so that we can remember what we did when we look back. But don't just write it down. Go do it. Go do the thing. And then come back to the somatic check-in and you'll log scale, set, and setting on the after side. And that's going to show you what the effects were of the action that you took to try to give yourself some relief. And overall, this is a tool that will help you calibrate and refine and get better at noticing your needs as they come up in real time, being able to translate what these sensations, emotions, and thoughts probably mean, and the different actions that you take that might that proved helpful, and it's going to help you just get clearer on all of that. So let me know if that was helpful, Nika. Paula, in addition to the somatic check-ins in the beginning, do you think it's helpful to focus on designating big chunks of time to rest at first, or focus on prioritizing the little 20-minute pauses throughout the day that our bodies naturally crave? Oh, that's a really great question. I think it's going to be very personal for each of us, but one thing I do want to say for us all is when it comes to rest, we're talking about safety. We're not resting, not because we don't believe it's important, but because something else has been positioned as more imperative to our survival. That's why we're not resting. And so in the beginning of the rest journey, I think it's important to acknowledge that like we have all had to come up with survival strategies and adaptations and coping mechanisms to work around the fact that we haven't lived in a world where we had conditions to feel safe enough to slow down. And so as we engage in the rest journey, that's the nervous system that we're going to be working with. And rather than making your nervous system wrong or adding or layering on more judgment and shame, which is not helpful, which actually leads to more shutdown, more shame, actually more agitation and restlessness around rest. I really encourage folks to tune into what you feel your realistic capacity is, because too much too fast is actually going to be not only is it going to cause your nervous system to shut down, but that's not going to actually lead to more rest. It could be more damaging to your attempt to rest if you're trying to bite off a lot more than your body and your nervous system can reasonably chew. So for some of us, designating a big chunk of time to rest might feel really good, you know, especially if we've been feeling really exhausted and burned out and great. But for some of us who are feeling exhausted and burned out, a big chunk of rest is going to feel more anxiety inducing than 20 minutes. And so I think you really just need to check in with yourself and based on what you know about yourself, figure out what would be, I think what's more important is that it's consistent, right? Most of us are accustomed to thinking about rest as something we only do on the weekend, or we only do on vacation, or we only do when we're sick and when we have COVID or when we're bedridden. I invite you to start to really push back on that. And so if I had to choose, I would recommend focusing 20 minutes a day in the middle of your workday or your school day for rest. And that's going to go a lot longer because that's going to be sustainable. We're not always going to be able to designate a huge chunk. But if you have days where you can and you feel curious about that, please do so. Um, but just realistically, given that we're all unlearning a lot of grind culture, a lot of workaholism that has quite frankly genuinely helped us survive, I think the 20 minutes is going to be a lot more digestible. So essentially we're all working on building up new habits, laying down new neural pathways so that slowly and over time, eventually all these small actions are going to add up and that scale is going to tip from rest feeling really unsafe to a little more safe, to a little more safe, to a little more safe. And it's just going to take time, friends. And that's why I really encourage you to continue to if you can find one or two people in your life who you can share this inquiry, this rest journey with, who you can talk about this stuff with. If you don't have any of those people in your life, come through to the community rest sessions. This month, what's it called? I'm experimenting with like inviting people to join breakout groups. It's an option, so you might have a chance to meet someone who you can stay in touch with about the rest journey. But yeah, just consistency and doing as much as you can to be in spaces where you're consuming really rest affirming messages. Any other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank you all for staying on 15 minutes longer. And thank you to all who asked questions. I really appreciate them. They're so thoughtful. And again, if you think of more questions, feel free to email me. Um, And yeah, I'm really excited to hear your feedback on this workshop to help me improve it for future groups. And to that, I send a really big hug. I hope each of us gets to have small moments of rest and joy and connecting to our bodies and the liberation that's always inherent inside. And I thank you for being here. Okay. Take care, everyone. Until next time. Bye.